So thank you very much for attending another in the Expert User webinar series for OpenAir. Today's topic is calendar use in OpenAir, and just highlighting some features of the calendar that a lot of people just don't realize are available, and make it a little more viable as of an option for you to use in place of graphical charts or even the reportings in the system. So the agenda today is to go through the OpenAir Calendar. We'll talk a little bit about what the Outlook connector does, and there's also an Exchange server level version of that integration. And then we'll also talk about the Google Calendar integration that you may not know about, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay. So the OpenAir Calendar, it's one of those tabs that shows up in the system. People see it when they first get introduced to OpenAir because the end user training is usually here's how you log in, here's how you change your password, here's where your personal settings are. And people see this calendar tab, but it's really not discussed very much. And so I thought I would take the time in this webinar to show you what features are available in the calendar and what it may be useful for in place of some other things that you're using or communicating to the end users. The Calendar tab is in the Home module, or in my system it's called the Dashboard module. For those of you who are in the older interface, it's the Account tab where you'll see the Calendar tab. And really what it shows you is information related to bookings, schedule requests, task assignments, and work schedules. And of course, if you've renamed any of those items, then it will show the rename in the various checkboxes. Now the calendar view itself can be daily, weekly, or monthly, and everyone can see their own personal calendar. However, if your OpenAir role has permission, you can also see the calendars of other people. And that's something in the OpenAir role. It's a checkbox in the permission set of the OpenAir role that a person can have called View Calendars for Other Users. If you have this option turned on, you'll have one more drop-down option on the OpenAir Calendar. And what that drop-down option is a department view. So unfortunately, it doesn't show you, for those of you who are familiar with the term assignment groups, that's a way that you could sort of group people according to maybe their organization or maybe their team structure or something. But that's independent in many cases from the department view. Department is that field that you can set on the user record. And it's a way in OpenAir, there's a few pieces of functionality that are attached to the term department. Things like certain reports can filter on department, timesheet alerts and expense alerts can be filtered by department. So department is typically used as an organization structure or a regional organization structure of grouping of people. Okay? So the great thing is if you have the organization structure and you're able to pull up your department or your group of people, then you'll be able to look at the calendars across those people. However, if you're responsible for more than one department, or you have one of those matrixed groups where your team is sort of a shared pool of everyone, so they're really not part of a single department, they're part of everyone else's department, but they report functionally to a manager, you'll have a little more difficulty because you may not have an actual department defined for your people. So it's limited in being able to group people, but if the department view works for you, then you'll be able to view that. In addition to the department view, people are in departments, of course, but you're only able to see the people on the calendar if your filter set controls it. So filter set is another one of those data view access things. So if you're allowed to see person XYZ, but your department only holds person X in it, then you'll be able to see person X. But maybe not Y and Z because they may not be in your data view or maybe not be in your department. So there's a combination of who you can see on the calendar. OpenAir role permissions for view calendars for other users, the department views and what departments you're allowed to have access to, and the filter sets, of course, control that. So if you haven't seen the calendar recently, you can open up your OpenAir system, and you'll see in the dashboard of the Home tab, you'll see the word Calendars. And this, the first drop-down is the time period that you want. So I've got this view, which is on the opposite side, set up to monthly, and therefore the time periods are in a month increment. If I change this to weekly, then I would have more starting date values like a timesheet if you have weekly timesheets. And if I hit daily, it's going to give me individual dates. Now the second column over is that department view I talked about. In my system, I don't really have a lot of departments, but I can see everyone, so I would be able to see the full list of departments here. And as I pick departments, I'm actually picking a number of people that are part of this organization structure. So I move this to something like Wednesday, July 4th, and I start turning on some options. You'll see how people's names start showing up. Subsequently, if I change this to blank out and then I pick individual people, the individual people will then show up. And this is what individuals will always be able to see, is at least themselves. If they have permission to see other people's calendars, then they'll have this other drop-down. So the basic structure is it gives you the ability to put bookings, schedule requests, task assignments, and or work schedules onto the calendar. So basically it's everything related to the scheduling of a person. The work schedule, if you're not familiar, that's your company calendar that is defined to you. Everyone has a default one that's on their user record, which defines the number of hours of working day and also the public holidays typically that are recognized by the organization. Task assignments, if you're doing resource scheduling with task assignments, that means the tasks themselves, you're maintaining the dates of those and the assigned people to those. Then the task assignments can be viewed on here to find out when people are supposed to be doing the work for those tasks. The other version of task assignments is bookings. That's the resource management module, or you can actually bring that functionality inside the projects module. But what a booking is basically a scheduling of resources, and it gives you more control over when people work on things, or maybe front-loading or back-loading the effort versus a task assignment, which is more of a peanut butter of a start and end time of the task. So task assignments and bookings are those resource management approaches that can be displayed on the calendar. And then of course schedule requests. And if you're using the schedule request functionality, you may have called it PTO request, time off request, vacation request, but it's really the ability to ask for vacation along the way, and then being able to identify that either on this calendar or in some other reporting that you're doing to see if people are taking vacation. Okay, so that's the basic construct of the calendar itself. So, what are some use cases that we can talk about? So one use case that I like to point out is the calendar actually will show you the company holiday schedule. So this may be important if you're dealing with multiple regions or offices or even countries where there's a multitude of holiday schedules across the department of people. And so if you want to find out what the holiday schedule is, if you're an administrator, you can go look at the calendar. But if you're not an administrator and you have permission to see other people's calendars, you can go to the calendar view and actually look it up for the department, what holidays are going on across the region for those people. So what happens is, in order to see the company holidays, you basically click the option for work schedule. Okay? I like to suggest starting with a monthly view, because the monthly view gives you the whole month of when the holidays are being scheduled. Now, a holiday will actually show up as the term work hours and then the number 0 along with a number in parentheses. Now the number in parentheses is the definition of work hours per day for your calendar. Typically I see 8, but there's also 7.5, 7.7, all kinds of combinations based on the regional requirements. But the work hours will still show you, and the day that it shows up on will be your public holiday. Okay? So if I take a look at my system, I'll change this to a monthly view. I'll pick it for July, and I click work schedule. And those of you in the U.S., July 4th is Wednesday. That's typically a holiday for many of the U.S. offices. That's also a holiday in my organization. Now, it doesn't tell you what the holiday is when you're looking at a monthly view or even a weekly view. If I changed it to weekly over here, you see it still says work hours 0. So how do I know what holiday it actually is? There's actually an ability to drill through by clicking the number. It's really hard to see on the webinar probably. Oops. Come on. Trying to fake it out by hitting back button a million times. hit work schedule. So here, there's actually, if I click on the number of the date, so here's 4, 5, 6. If I click on 4, it automatically flips me into a daily view. So you see how the calendar changed to daily view. I'm looking specifically at July 4th. And then if you look at the schedule exception details, it says it's July 4th. That just happens to be the name of the holiday in the U.S. But if I picked maybe December 25th, it would probably say Christmas in the calendar view that you're seeing. So this is how you can actually look up the name of the holiday itself. And if you click into the summary, it actually will give you a little more detail about the start and end time of that entire holiday. For many offices, I see holidays are sort of one days, but when it comes around to, in the U.S., Thanksgiving, with my friends over in Israel, they tend to have like a festival that goes for a week. So the start and end date actually will tell you the length of time for that holiday, and then of course the name of the holiday. So this one just happens to be a single day, but that for Thanksgiving for many people it's maybe the 25th and 26th is the length of the whole the holiday between the 2 days. Okay, so that's something I think a lot of people don't realize, is that it does actually display detailed information, and you can drill through. This is one of the areas in the OpenAir system that you can actually drill through as information is all linked together. So you can only imagine if you picked like your department and you'd be able to see all these work schedule things, you could click into that day, or of course you could always change it to daily view, and then you'd be able to see the detailed information about, well, how long is this public holiday, and what's the name of it, in case you're not familiar with that region's public holidays. Another use case is for your team vacation schedule. I think I find this one the most useful. If you're in charge of a department, of course, then you're wanting to see everyone when they're supposed to be taking vacation. This does depend on people using schedule requests in your system, because then you're indicating into the system that you're taking time off. Now, the unique thing about this is that the schedule requests on the calendar view are ignorant of the bookings or schedule exception features. So for those of you who are familiar with configuration, and if you're not, I'll explain it. When you submit a schedule request into the system and it gets approved, there is one of two things that can happen in the system. It can either blank out that day of the week or whatever you're taking, say you're taking a week of vacation. It can blank that week out as a 0-hour working days, and that's called a schedule exception, which means you are not available to even be scheduled. So if you looked at it in the resources module in the chart, it would look like blank days, not even a defined day. The other option is actually it can create a booking, and it can create a booking with a type that you define in the system, like leave or vacation or time off or something. And so you look like you're scheduled, but you're scheduled for time off, so people know that you're on vacation there. So how you configure your schedule requests in the system impacts how the resource chart looks in the system. And if you're not familiar with the resource chart, that's over here in the resources module. If I go to the chart, anyone that has like blank values, say like the week of the 20th, let's say this was completely empty. There wasn't even an outline of a day. That means your system is configured to basically remove those days from people's availability, remove them completely. Versus perhaps like this week, say that this person has decided to take vacation this week, it would look like they're fully booked if they're doing a booking approach. So if these are empty or completely missing, the outlines are completely missing, you've gotten the schedule exception approach. If you see bookings of a certain vacation type, you're taking the bookings approach. So obviously the approach you take when you're looking at this resource bookings chart, it impacts that view. When you're looking at the chart or the calendar view is ignorant of whichever way you've taken it. It just knows that there's a schedule request. So that's an advantage that this calendar has over the resource chart, is because it doesn't care whether you've scheduled it as a schedule exception or as a booking. It's going to show you that you put a schedule request in the system. So again, I would recommend starting with a monthly view, selecting a department, and then clicking on schedule requests. When you click on schedule requests, anything that has been entered in the system is going to show up. So you can see the first week of July, I had taken that as vacation, and then a couple of my colleagues also took a couple of the days of vacation after the 4th of July. And so it shows you this information so you can see very quickly who's on vacation and who's not. And you'll notice that in brackets at the end of it, it shows the status of it. So these have all been approved, but if you've submitted it, it'll notice that it's submitted. So another way for department managers to not only use the reminders on the dashboard to review and approve things, but also to see them on the calendar view as well. Now, another thing about the naming or the terminology that comes up on these schedule requests, it shows the person's name and the number of hours that they're taking. So of course, if they're taking a half day, it would put 4 hours. If it's a weekend, for example, it's 0 hours because I don't have to burn any vacation here. But then it has the word none. Okay. The reason the word none is there is if you're using time types. And time types are something that you can put on your timesheet itself. And the time type is what you typically have people set or default to when they're creating a schedule request. It could actually be behind the scenes, or you may actually select it on the schedule request. But for those of you using time types, you may have something called vacation or time off or personal holiday. And it would display that as in the wording for it. If you're not using time types, like my organization does not use time types currently, we actually, the word none shows up because we're not having any kind of time types associated with it. So that's just some additional, depending on the feature you're using, what terminology will show up on the calendar itself. Of course, just like anything else, if I wanted to get more information, I could drill down into this day. It'll show me that the person is taking vacation this time. And if I click into, this is the unique thing about the vacation, if I click into the summary, it actually brings me not only just to a pop-up of details, but it brings me into the schedule request itself. So I actually can look at the detail of what has been requested. From here I can't do a submit and approve action, but you can at least view it. So I can see this entire request was actually over a 2-week period. Again, one of the unique places in the system that does have a complete drilled through capability. And here's just a detailed view on the slide set about how you can drill through and see the detail of the schedule request itself. So a nice handy way to see people's time and vacation without having to run a report perhaps, without having to go to the schedule request in the timesheet module, and of course not having to load the entire resource bookings chart, for example, or the task assignment charts in the system because you'll have the information already available there. Another view is another use for the calendar, and this is ideal, but it does depend heavily on your resource management approach, is the ability for people to see what they're scheduled to work on. Okay? So people always can see themselves on this calendar. They come to the calendar, they either see themselves, or if you can see other people, you'll see other people. But they select themselves, and then what they have to turn on is either bookings or task assignments. Again, this is dependent on how you as an organization do your resource management. Don't select both because it'll probably be a bunch of gobbledygook. But in this case, like I'm picking bookings, and it'll show the information that the people are supposed to be working on from the booking scheduling within the system. Now, how you've put the bookings or the task assignments in the system, OpenAir doesn't care when it's showing this calendar. It's going to break everything down to a daily view. Even if you're looking at it from a month, it's going to break it down by day detail. Right. So as many of you know by looking at even just the charts and stuff like that in the system, you know that it shows a lot of granularity. So if I change this to bookings for July, and let's just say I'm going to pick myself, some of these bookings are really nice. They show 8 hours a day, and some of them show fractional hours, 0.74 hours, 714 hours on Monday for a customer, and 0.4 for another customer. And what that means is the entries in the system are not actually day-by-day entries. I've entered them for the week, an estimate of effort for the week, or maybe for the entire month. And so OpenAir is dividing that automatically by the working days per month or the working days for the week, and it comes up with fractions. Now, many people don't like the fractional view, but it is something that OpenAir will do. Now, if your resource management is very focused on keeping whole numbers, like 40 hours in a week or 16 hours over these 2 days, the calendar view looks looks wonderful. Okay, but otherwise it's going to show fractions, and so you'll have to identify, check with your folks and see, is this too confusing to say that you're supposed to work 0.02 hours over the next 6 weeks, or do you know that you just have to work 8 hours at some point in time this month? Now, because it shows the fractional information and doing the division, just like the other options I've shown you, if you drill into the detail of the day, you'll be able to have people drill through to see what was the actual booking or task assignment for. So if they're coming with 0.714, what was I actually scheduled to do? So they can see a little bit more information about realistically what they're supposed to be working on. So let me pick something like this 0.476. And if I come down here and click on this actual booking, you can see I'm actually supposed to be working 10 hours over the month, which is why everything rounds up. Okay? And that makes a lot more sense to people, so they know that they have the entire month to work the 10 hours. They just know the fractions are a result of the display options. So compare the time load for this. So my computer is not the fastest in the world, but if I click on calendars and I change this to somebody else's name, that's how quickly it updates. If I go to the resources module, and some of you really want to use the charts, as I'm talking it took a little bit longer to load. Now that's just my organization, and my organization is small compared to many of you on the phone. So your chart probably takes much longer to load. And I'd challenge you actually to go and open up the calendar with a department view of the same number of people and see how quickly that loads. The advantage of using the calendar in OpenAir to show the same information with drill through is that it loads very quickly. And I know that's something that end users really want to get to the data right away. So another option for people to look at and reason for them to be able to use the calendar. There are a bunch of other features available from the system, and those are actually all in the optional features view in the system. So something like you can actually hide the calendar altogether if you want. If you don't want to use it at all, it's called Hide My Calendar. The reason it's named My Calendar is that's part of the old user interface terminology, and everything was My Calendar, My Options, My personal settings. And of course in 2010 they changed the user interface and took the My part of it off. So there's still switches in the system that have this terminology. You can actually control the number of rows that are displayed in the My Calendar monthly view. So I have it set up right now when I do a monthly view that I see 4 rows of information, and before it says the word more. In order for me to see more, I have to drill into that day. Of course, in my personal settings, I could always go and change that, I believe. So instead of 4, I can make it 7. And save it. Then if I went back and looked at my monthly view, you can see I see more rows. And I don't actually, in some of these I have exactly 7. So I'm seeing everything that I can see. Here I have more than 7, so it's a little bit harder to see without drilling through. There's another option that to be able to put that tab and put it in all of the modules. I will tell you that I recently was checking this tab, and it doesn't seem to work anymore, but I'm going to submit a request to OpenAir. So it used to work where the tabs would go in, and I don't know when it stopped working, to be honest, because I only usually use the calendar in the home module anyway, just because it's logical for me to put it there, but that doesn't explain why it stopped working. The show all options on the calendar regardless of module access specifically talks to the terminology of if you don't have access to the resource module, then you can't see your schedule. But if you have your home module, you should be able to go to the calendar and see your bookings, for example, if you're doing that. So even if you can't have the resource module, you can still have the bookings. Even if you don't have the projects module, you can still have the task assignments is what this feature does. If you wanted to show inactive projects, you certainly can, but typically if it's inactive, you don't want people to be working on it. And then work schedule time ranges. So if you didn't know this, in the OpenAir work schedule or company calendar definition, you can actually define the start and end time of a day. That's one of the features in the calendar itself. So of course, if you have the start and end time of a day defined in the calendar, you can display that on the OpenAir calendar itself. And then Regarding bookings or task assignments, there are certain feature functionality that you can add to the system that would also be able to be displayed on the calendar. For example, bookings have booking types, so if you know whether it's soft or hard or tentative or confirmed or overtime or weekend work, something like that, you can display that as part of the booking information if you're displaying bookings on the calendar. Likewise, if you've added custom fields to the booking, you can also add those custom fields on display for your calendar value when you drill through to look at the details. Okay. Same thing for task assignments. You have custom fields on your task assignments. So at the monthly view or at the daily view, you can show that information, all those custom fields, so you don't lose that information in the communication, which again may be something very helpful. So if you're sending emails to people based on the bookings with the content of the customizations, the calendar can also show that as well. So some of you that I've talked with are always thinking of ways to help with communication. And one way to help with communication is to use the Outlook connector. The Outlook connector is an additional piece of software that everyone can download from within OpenAir. It's under Administration, Integration, Add-on Services, or if you're in the older interface, I think it's under Account, Company Settings, Add-on Services, or Company and then Add-on Services. And what that allows you to do is it installs something on your desktop called the Outlook connector. So let me go to my desktop, and I'm going to launch the Outlook connector, and hopefully you guys would be able to see that. Okay. So what the Outlook connector does, and I'll bring up the slideshow because I have the same thing here. It's a one-way integration to push information from OpenAir into Outlook. I have been told by OpenAir that a two-way integration is being planned, specifically regarding appointments related to OpenAir. I have no ETA on when that will be available. So right now the connector actually is just one way. And what you do is you basically define what the Outlook calendar is that you're exporting to, and then what your login information is into OpenAir. And when you run it, what it will do is export whatever it is you've identified. So schedule requests, bookings, or project tasks. And of course you can put a time frame on that so you're not exporting a bunch of stuff that's too old to even be worthwhile. So I have this set up to export onto my calendar. And if I hit start, what it's going to do is it's just going to start up a session. Let me log in. To push the bookings that I have in the system over to my calendar. Now the bookings, as you noticed, I showed you a couple examples of the bookings I put in. Sometimes I put them as weekly, sometimes I put them as monthly. It's going to come over into my OpenAir system, into my Outlook calendar as an event defined in the same time frame of the work that I just did. And let me make sure you guys can still see can you guys still see in the browser or the slides? Just click up there on the chat if you can. Okay, good, thank you. So the connector, when it finishes, it creates all the bookings that you have, or of course if you're using task assignments, the task assignments. It's going to create an event with the same start and end time. And if you click into the event, you'll see the details. So let's see how that's doing, if it's finished yet. It's still going. And let me start my Outlook. Hopefully this doesn't freeze up everything. And so if I go over to the week or the month, you can see how these bookings are showing up on my calendar. If I go historically, you can see here's all the bookings I loaded historically into the system in preparation for the webinar. So you can see how if I drill into any of these items, you can see some of the details about the booking itself, similar to the way it would look on the calendar in OpenAir. So we'll go ahead and just let this keep running and continue on with the presentation. But to most people, the booking information as an event, not terribly useful. If you're scheduling people for 2 days or a week, it is at least a little bit useful because they know exactly when they're supposed to be doing it. But a common complaint I get from people is that, well, I can't add the custom fields. I can't modify it in Outlook and send information back to OpenAir, of course. And I have limited control over the configuration of what is being passed. That's absolutely true. So another option that's available from OpenAir is this Exchange Server Outlook integration. What that does is at the Exchange Server level, it is still a one-way from OpenAir into Outlook, but you can customize your OpenAir bookings to use a start and end time. That start and end time then can be passed to the Outlook Exchange module, and it will create appointments, not just events, but appointments. And people many times find that more helpful, but it does come with a trade-off, and that trade-off is setting the start and end time on bookings, for example, because now you have to set up that additional level of administration in order to get appointments onto calendars. Now, I have worked with a number of customers who have been putting appointments on people's calendars anyway using a public calendar approach. So to them, adding the start and end time is not a tremendous overhead. It just saves them from going between two systems. They just stay in OpenAir and put a start and end time. To others, if you are not used to doing appointments, this may be extra administration with little benefits. So it's something to kind of test out first and see if it would be worthwhile for you to add the start and end time and to use the Exchange Server integration. The Exchange Server integration is actually a separate piece of software that you have to purchase from OpenAir, and then your IT department would actually just configure it with your Microsoft Exchange Server to be able to pass to Outlook. So there's really nothing else that you as an end user need to do, or even an administrator. It really comes to down to your IT department. So before we go on to Google, let's see if that Outlook connector finished. Oh, it finished. So let's see what my calendar looks like now. We've got 17 reminders, which is probably because of here's all the bookings that came up as reminders. Just go ahead and dismiss all those. And so here's what my August is starting to look like. So you can see how even if I click on entire weeks, the bookings are not changing very often, because quite often I use monthly bookings or weekly bookings depending on the granularity of the project itself that's going on. Okay. Definitely something you can feel free to play with because the Outlook connector is an individual integration. The Exchange Server is something that's a little harder because it's a server level integration which impacts multiple people. But another option is Google integration, Google Calendar integration. So if you're, it's very similar to the Outlook connector, but this is actually an integration that you configure inside OpenAir. So this is relatively new. It's only been out for about a year, but it has expanded beyond Outlook then for those of you who are using Google Apps to be able to use the integration with Google Calendar and pass your task assignments or your bookings over to the Google Calendar. Now to enable this, you have to have OpenAir turn on the Google integration switch, and that under the Administration Global Settings page, you'll see an Integration Google Calendar option. When you click that option, you get to set the domain name of what your app group is. Like ours is Top Step Consulting. And then each person, you identify on the person level the Google username so that it knows how to log into that or access that account within the domain. From there, you identify whether you're exporting bookings or task assignments, very similar to the Outlook calendar. But if you're integrating bookings, you get another option which says you can identify whether the time is being set as busy or as time is being set as free. So one thing you may have noticed when I was doing the Outlook integration, the events came across and my time was free, which means it didn't indicate that I was out of the office or busy or anything like that. It just came across as free time. With the Google Calendar, it goes a little step beyond, so you can actually block the day according to the event or just set it as free and use it as a reminder field altogether. And then it does have another option, which is Do Not Export, which means perhaps you have something like internal training or vacations or something, and you're using certain booking types to indicate that, or maybe tentative as a booking. You don't want people to export tentatives. Maybe you only want them to export confirmed. Then you can identify what booking type gets exported and which ones don't, and which ones are busy and which ones are free. Okay. Now these custom fields are actually, there's custom fields behind this. configuration and the custom fields around the bookings. They will actually appear on the booking grids, just to warn you. They're set up as hide on data entry fields. So if you bring up a booking form, you shouldn't see these fields, but if you look at the booking chart or grid, the grid actually will show them anyway, even though they're hidden for data entry. So just be aware of that. When you turn it on, you may see some additional things in the booking grid if you're using it, or booking worksheet it may be called in your system. So in order for you to actually use the Google integration, of course, you have to have administration configurations to be able to talk to Google. And then when you turn it on, the people will actually get an OpenAir version of their Google Calendar. So they'll get an additional calendar called OpenAir that they can use. The other challenge is if you start manipulating things on the Google Calendar, the OpenAir Google Calendar, it will not feed back to OpenAir, just like the Outlook connector doesn't feed back to OpenAir. So if you delete something, it won't re-export again because OpenAir will think it's already exported. So something that, this kind of integration, it doesn't hurt anything to put it in place, to try it out. And if you like it, obviously you can keep it there. If you don't like it, you can always just turn it off. So the calendar availability within the OpenAir system, I just wanted to highlight those use cases that I think will help in some configurations where people they're not happy with the resources module, for example, or the task assignments module. The team vacation schedule is being handled within a spreadsheet outside the system. There's ways to use the features in the system, especially with the calendar, to make life a little bit easier. And you saw how fast it loads. And it has drill-through capability, so something easy to play with because it's already there. You don't have to turn anything on. It's already there in the system. Okay. External calendar integrations, they are one way currently, and with the Google Calendar expansion beyond the Outlook version, that's a direction where they're supporting other products. OpenAir is supporting other products. Two-way potentially is coming soon. I don't have an ETA on that, but that is just lends the focus to OpenAir is still watching and developing on this calendar base. Okay. So I want to thank you very much for attending the webinar itself. If you want to know more about what we do as far as an organization, I know you've seen this slide in every webinar, but feel free to visit our website. We also are participants in the OpenAir Users LinkedIn group. So there's lots of good conversations that are starting to pop up on that group, and I encourage you to join that group if you're not already a member to be able to see the discussions, and we also publish weekly tips out there. And for those of you who are familiar with our weekly tips, we actually have recently pulled them together into an eBook, so you don't have hundreds and hundreds of tips listed out there on our website. We're trying to make it easy for you to be able to get all these in one fair swoop. So we pulled about 53 tips together. We put them in an eBook that you can download in PDF or EPUB format. So you have them all organized by the different modules and processes so that you can have them at your quick reference fingertips. Not that we don't want you to come to our webinar or our website, but we do find that it would probably be easier if you had your own version of the book. So for $3.99, feel free to access that on our website, download it, and we'll continue to issue these yearly just so that you can have the most up-to-date tip information available. So thank you once again, and I look forward to hearing some ideas from you guys, and we'll get that schedule out there as soon as possible. Thanks so much.